Okay, so good evening, guys. I hope everyone, you and your friends are here. So, welcome to the first ever study jam conducted by Developer Student Club, Manipal University, Jaipur. This will be a session on Kotlin programming language and will be conducted by Hardik Srivastav.
Hello everyone. My name is Hardik, and I'm a second year student here in CC branch. And I'm the facilitator for the study jams, and I'll be hosting it here in our college. Let's start off by actually talking about as to what are Android study jams. Android study jams are actually community organized study groups which are made for people to learn how to develop Android apps using an online training course, which is provided by Google's, and it contains material which is directly related to Kotlin and Android development techniques. So in these study jams, we will be actually having two tracks. First being the new to programming track, and the second being the prior programming track. So I'll actually open up the landing page for the study jams, which is this g.co/android/study jams. So soon as you'll open it, you will be provided with these two tracks. So in the new to programming track, actually, you'll be so in the new to programming track, you will be taught about the Kotlin basics, and you will be building a very simple Android app. First of all, you will start with the Hello World project, and you'll be making small changes in order to learn how actually the Android app development techniques work. Whereas for the prior experience track, it actually has a lot of in-depth content, whether it be Kotlin or Android development techniques in general. So first of all, in the prior programming experience track, you will be doing this Kotlin cones exercise, which covers up the basics and actually some mediocre and experienced techniques for the Kotlin itself. And whereas in when you'll actually be performing the course, you will go through and learn about the UI development and the Android app development. Here, as we can, so first of all, let's actually talk about the certificates which you will be getting. So this certificate is actually only available for those who complete this prior programming experience track. So do keep in mind that. So we'll be handing out these to everyone after January 25th, which is actually the deadline to complete this track. So before January 25, whoever submits and tells us that they have completed it and we have verified it, we'll be sending out the certificates to them. And just so make sure that you guys complete this before January 25, that being the deadline. So now, apart from that certificate, you will be also earning some different kinds of badges as you go through and solve those code labs. So I'll actually show you your developer profile. So for that, you'll have to open this page, google.dev/u/me. So this is actually a landing page for a Google developer profile. So all you have to do is basically sign in from here. So yeah, just use your email account to sign in. And as soon as you sign in, you will be greeted with this landing page wherein let's wait for it to load. So yeah, so this is the landing page where you will be presented with all the badges which you have accumulated throughout by performing and solving this code labs and going through the course in general. So in order to earn the certificate at the end, after doing the prior program track, you will be asked to actually send a screenshot of this Google developer profile containing all the badges, which is very necessary for us to verify that you have actually completed the tracks itself. So let's see. Let's now we have actually already talked about this. So now let's actually start with the Kotlin basics itself now. So yeah, so first of all, I'll just go ahead and turn off my camera. Yeah, so for executing Kotlin programs in my browser, I'll be using a tool which is known as Kotlin Playground. So this is an official tool by the Kotlin Language Corporation, and yeah, so this is the window which you will be seeing. So I'll just delete it. So now let's actually start off by writing the most basic fundamental program which we can actually write in Kotlin. Well, if you can guess, that is going to be the Hello World program. So I'll start off by writing fun main, then inside it I'll write println hello world. So don't worry, guys, I'll explain it in a bit. So just for now, just see as to what I wrote, and I'll hit on run. Now, as you can see, the output is what we expected, which is hello world. So just to give a rough overview as to what I just did here, what I did is basically create a function which I gave the name as main, and inside it I wrote a statement to print the line hello world on my screen. So so that is how actually we print stuff in Kotlin. So apart from this, you can actually print, just to give you a rough overview as to about the print statement itself. What we I can show is, like, let's say we have something else, like let's say I want to print my name. I can just pass in here my name itself, and this will print Hardik and hello world. So this was a general overview of the print line statement. So let's actually talk about some more fundamental things. So let's start with something which I think is the most fundamental thing in any programming language, which is creating variables and using them actually. So in Kotlin, there are actually two ways in which you can create a variable. So the first where the first way is where we use the keyword val, and the second is actually where we use the keyword var. So I'll first show the use of val. So all you have to do is basically write val, then followed by a space, the name of a variable. Let's say I want to name it a, and followed by an equal to, and then the value which you want to store. So let's say I want to store 10 here. So now what I've just did is basically create a variable which is named a, and it has a value 10 in it. So I can also just go ahead and try to print this all together. So when I hit on run, it will just print out 10. So that was expected. Yeah. The other method is actually by using the keyword var. So I'll just use var, and let's say I want to create a variable b. Let's say I want to store 15 in it. So that is how we create the variable using the keyword var. I'll just print it out again here, and I'll hit on run. So yeah, as you can see, it printed out the output as 10 and 15. Now, val and var are actually, yeah, like you can use both for creating variables in your programming while using Kotlin. But there's actually a major key point of difference between both of them. So, if you know, like anything about immutable objects, so what happens is, if you set any variable, if you define any variable using the keyword val, you cannot actually change its value after that's initialized. So here, if I would try to, let's say I want to reallocate the value of 10, of a from 10 to, let's say, 20, and whenever I'll try to run it, it will just throw me an error saying that val cannot be reassigned. So this is the basic concept of val, where after we have initialized it with some value, we cannot change it anytime throughout our program. Whereas in var, I can just go ahead and rename or like reallocate it to anything. Like I can just do it 100, and when I'll try to run it, it will just print out like 10 and 100, since we already changed the value of b from 15 to 100. So this actually happens at runtime. So what basically val does is set the value of that variable as a constant during runtime. So yeah, so that was basic overview as to how you can create variables in Kotlin. So now that we know what variable is in the Kotlin programming language, let's talk about the data types. Now, if you have already been programming in some other language, you must have noticed that I did not actually provide any sort of indication as to what data type my variable is going to be. Like usually in Java, you will be writing int a equal to 10 or something like that. Whereas in Kotlin, there is a feature called smartcast. So what smartcast actually does is basically check as to what kind of data is being allocated to that variable, and it automatically assigns that data type to our variable itself. So here, since I already set my variable a as 10, which is actually an integer, if I would try to go ahead and maybe let's say reallocate it to something like 15.5, which is actually a decimal number, so, or a double if we are going to speak in technical terms, it will actually give me an wait. So I cannot actually reassign val. So let me try it with b. So let's say if I just want to say as b equal to 15.5, it will actually give me an error saying that this floating point literal does not conform to the expected type int. And this is a super neat feature in Kotlin where you do not need to mess around with the data types, and for each and every variable, you can just go ahead and write as val and var and allocate your value. So now that is the basic overview of the data type using data types. But let's say you have a situation where you actually need to allocate, set, explicitly define the data type for a variable. Like it might be that you are receiving some form of data from somewhere else. Like it might be the case that val is equal to x and you do not know what x is going to be or what its data type is going to be. So what we can do is actually just after our name, our variable name, what we can do is basically place a colon and then write the data type for our variable. So let's say I want to have it as int. So I just wrote int, and right now I'll just place my value here. So just like here in var as well, I'll just place a colon, and maybe I can just set it like, let's say I want it to be a double. I can just write it to be a double for a floating number. So I'll change this to something like 15.9 maybe. Yeah, and remove this. So now when I run it, it'll give me the output exactly as what we wanted. So it will just print 10 and 15.9. So this is a major advantage of providing the explicitly mentioning the data types, because in those cases where you do not know what kind of data am I going to receive. So that is a basic overview of like the data, using data types in Kotlin. It has, like you do have other data types like float, string, and as we saw, integer and double, but we'll talk about them at some other point. So now let's actually talk about operators. So what is an operator exactly? So an operator is basically a symbol which tells the compiler or the interpreter to, let's say, perform a specific operation on some elements. So let's say we have a situation where we have two numbers. So I'll just delete this. And let's say we have another variable in B, and it is of type int and it has a value 20. So let's say I want to print the sum of it. So what I'll be doing is writing println, and inside those brackets, I'll write A plus B. So this, when I try to run it, it will give me the sum of it. Yeah, you saw, basically added 10 and 20 and gave us the sum. So now this plus is actually an arithmetic operator right here, and what it did is basically read the value in the variable a, which was 10 in our case, and the value of b, which is 20 in our case. And what it did is basically add those both up and gave us a result which was the sum of them. So apart from these arithmetic operators, you also have different. So apart from addition as well, you have like minus, multiplication, like stuff like division and modulus and everything. So that is something. It is arithmetic operations are basically as same as most other languages. So it is no different in Kotlin right here. So that was a basic overview of the arithmetic operation. Yeah. So now let's actually start off by and talk about conditional statements in Kotlin, which are actually quite interesting in my opinion compared to other programming languages. So let's say we have these two numbers already. We have val a and val b. Now let's say we want to print some kind of statement, like our problem is where we want to print a statement when if a is less than b. Now what we can do is basically use the for writing and defining a condition, what we do is basically use the if keyword. So I'll be doing if, and inside this brackets I'll write my expression, and I'll put a less than b. So now what I wrote is the expression which I wanted to check if whether it is going to be true. So after that, I'll place a code block, and inside this code block, I'll write the statements which I want to execute when this condition is found to be true. So basically, if all the statements which I'm going to write in, like let's I write println, and let's I write great. So the lines which is inside this code block will be executed when a is found to be less than b. So if I'll execute it right now, it will just go ahead and print great. Yeah. So this is like the basic operation of the if operator. So what I just did is basically use the the if keyword, then place my expression inside these brackets, which I wanted to check whether it is going to be true or false, and provided it with a code block. So whenever my expression is going to be true, this statement will be executed. And let's say if I change this expression, like let's say if I make it a greater than b. So what will happen now if I try to run it? Like as you can see, it actually did not print out anything, since our condition was actually turned out to be false, because a is 10 and b is 20. So 10 is not actually greater than 20. So these statements were never actually executed. So in that case, where like let's say I want to execute something when this condition turns out to be false, for those situations, what we do is basically provide an else clause. So I'll just write the keyword else and just provide it with a code block. And I'll write, let's say, not great. Yeah. So after writing not great, let's see. But I try to run it. Yeah. So it gave us not great. So this is a super basic if else ladder. Now let's say we have another situation wherein we want to check if what if both A and B are equal. So what I can do is basically add an else if clause. So now I'll write else if A equal to B, and I'll just write my statement something here, like let's say I want to print neutral. So now what will happen is, first of all, it will check if A turns out to be greater than B. It will just print great, and like come out of this whole if else ladder. Then if like in a situation, if this turns out to be false, it will basically check for this now. Like let's say if A turns out to be equal to B, it will actually print neutral, and then it will just skip this else statement and come out of this if else ladder. Now, whereas if both of these conditions actually turn out to be false, like A is not greater than B and A is also not equal to B, what will happen is basically the else part will be executed. So it will just go ahead and print not read. So for now, let's say I'll just change this 20 to 10. So I'll now run it. So yeah, as you can see, it basically found out that since A and B are equal, I'll go ahead and print a neutral. So one thing, like just how we just saw those arithmetic operators. So these greater than sign, this equal to, and like let's say we also have the smaller than sign. Those These are actually known as the relational operators. And what this does is basically take the two values, which here it will just read the value of A, then it will also read the value of B, and this greater than sign will check if the value of A is going to be greater than B or not. Now, if it turns out that the value of A is greater than B, it will say that the statement is true, and the if condition will execute this part, which is our println statement. But if it turns out that the value of A is actually smaller than B, it will just say that the expression is false, and our println great statement will never be executed. So similarly, in the equal to part, it will just check if the value of a and b are actually equal, and therefore if they are found to be equal, it will say that the expression is true, and the neutral part will be executed. So this is a basic, like a super basic if else ladder in Kotlin. Now let's say we have another case. So let's say we have a variable x. Now I'll just go ahead and set x to be 3. Now consider a theoretical situation where we do not actually know what the value of x is going to be. Like let's say we are just receiving it from somewhere else, and we want to execute statements based off on the values of this. Like if x is, like let's say it is 1, I wanted to print great. If it is 2, I want to print it maybe like neutral. If it is 3, like let's say I just want to print not great. So one thing, like as you saw, if you saw this, one thing which you can do is basically write if x is equal to 1, then print this. If x, else if x is equal to 2, then print that. Else if x is equal to 3, then print that. But instead of that, what Kotlin provides us is a when statement. So with when, what I'll just do is write when and provide it with my value of x. So now what this function does is, so what one actually does is basically, if I just create a the code block. Now I, let's say I actually wanted to print out great if x was going to be 1. So I'll write 1, which is my case for x in order to match. Then I'll put this arrow sign. Now this arrow sign is actually known as a lambda operator in Kotlin. So after that lambda operator, I'll just pass on, write my code block. Now I'll write my statements here which I want to execute when the value of x turns out to be 1. So I'll write println. Let's say I wanted to print great. So that will be executed when my value of x is 1. Now let's say let's add the other cases which were for 2 and 3. So for 2, I'll just go ahead and write maybe something like neutral. Yeah, then after that, I'll add my third case, which is going to be not great. Yeah, okay, yeah. So now when I'll try to execute it, let's see. It gives, yeah, for the second case, which is after the if else starter, it gave us not great. So as you can see, which is exactly what we wanted. Now, if any one of you has actually been programming in other languages, might say that this is basically a switch case type of statement, which is actually true, but it's, I think in my opinion, it's actually a better because the statements are laid out better and everything. So now let's actually do one thing. Now let's say, what if I change 3 to something like 10, which is not exactly covered up by this when part. So now when I'll try to run it, it won't actually, wait, I'll just comment out this so you won't get confused. Yeah, so if after commenting that out, let's see what it actually prints out, which is, yeah, it is nothing because the when statement is actually unable to find anything for what would you say, any case for the x value to match when it is equal to be 10. So for that, let's say you want to just basically print out something when the value of x does not match to any of our cases listed. So I'll just go ahead and add the else clause, just like what we did in this if else ladder right here. So I'll just write else, and I'll just pass my new block. I'll just write my new block here, and let's say I'll just say unknown. So now when I try to run it, it will say unknown. Yeah, so this is actually what we expected. So this was the when statement, and yeah, and also we talked about the if else statements as well. So now before moving forward, I'll actually go ahead and let's see the chat if we have any questions or anything. Okay, re-explain when keyword again. Okay, I'll do that. Does it break when one case match? Yes. So now, like if you saw, like when we, let's say I have my value of x as 1. So as soon as I'll run it, it will just, wait, I'll just comment this block out again so that it won't confuse anyone. So yeah, now as you can see, since my value of x is 1, it will just print out, execute the block which is corresponding to that case, which is 1 here. So it will just print out great. No need to write anything like break or like worry that it will execute some other block or anything. So yeah, I hope that solved your question. So meaning the value, what? Well, yeah, I think that was the result. So I'll re-explain when again, since one of you guys wanted it to. So I'll just delete it. So now, let's take a theoretical case again. Let's say we have a variable. I'll name it z right now. Yeah, let's say we have a value in z. Now we don't actually know what this value of z is going to be. Like, let's say the user inputs some random value, or we provide it within options, and the user enters something in the range of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. So let's say that initially a var is going to be z. Now, in order to execute code accordingly, depending on what the value of z is, what I'll do is make the use of the when keyword. So I'll write when, and I'll provide when with the value of z, and inside this code block for when, I'll be writing the code for different cases which I want to execute depending on the value of set. So let's say for the value of 1, I want to execute or print, maybe let's say something else, like I want to produce study jams. Yeah, let's do that. Now let's say when the value of z is, let's skip 2, let's directly go to 3. Let's say when the value of z is going to be 3, and we want to actually print, let's say DSC maybe. Yeah, so let's take that condition. So now initially our value is going to be z. Now just think of that we don't know what the value z is going to be. Let's say you are getting some kind of value from somewhere or from the user input, and you just want to execute statements based on this value. So now I'll go ahead and run it. Now, as soon as I run it, yeah, as you can see, since the value of z was 1 here, it just printed out study jam, which was what we listed for the first part. Now, let's say if I change it to 2. Now, let's see what happens. It won't actually print out anything because 2 is not listed out as any case or any condition in our when statement. So the program, the compiler doesn't know what to do. So it just skips out this whole block and just continues to do whatever like is after it. So we can actually counter that by adding an else clause. So this else block will be executed whenever none of the cases actually match our when in our when statement. So I can just write println unknown, and it will print out unknown whenever it finds out a value which is unknown for us and is not covered by any case. So yeah, so that was the when block. Now, let's actually talk about something a bit more advanced. Let's talk about arrays. So, uh, okay, so someone is actually asking the difference between when and if. Okay, so we can use if block, like if I just comment it out. So as you can see, for using my if statements, I actually had to have to provide an expression. Like there is some sort of logic behind this. Like if I want to check if A is going to be greater than B or not, if A is going to be equal to B or not, or like if A is technically going to be lesser than B. So while writing my if else letter, I actually have to provide statements based off on some logic. Whereas in using when, I just want to execute my statements based off on what's the value which stored inside a variable. Right, I could just return like something like if z is equal to 1, else if z is equal to 2, or like I'll just place it right here. Like I could have just written this and it would work. I mean, it is technically correct, but the better way for using this kind of approach is actually through when, because you do not have any kind of condition which you want to check. You just need to execute statements based off on a value which is stored inside a variable. So now that we are done with our conditional statements, let's go ahead and talk about arrays. So now, what are arrays basically? So by definition, an array is a continuous block of memory which stores some values together. So consider an array to be like a line of different variables just lined together and which are storing some form of data. So theoretically, an array is actually supposed to same values of the same type, so like a of same type. So in other program language like the Java and C, you can actually and only save values which are of same data type throughout the array. Whereas in Kotlin, you actually have the flexibility of saving multiple kinds of data types inside Kotlin. So let's say I want to create an array of my name, my exact age, let's say in decimal, and let's say I want to also write my uh, date of like my birth year, which is going to be an integer. So what I'll do is basically write array of, and inside these brackets I'll just start off by writing my own values. So first of all, since I have to write my name, it is going to be a string. Then for age, let's say I'll write 18.9, something like that. Now for my birth year, I'll just go ahead and write 2002. So now, as you can see, in a single array, I've actually stored a variable which I actually stored data which is of a string type. Then I've also stored data which is of double type, and I've also stored data which is of int type. Now, don't actually get confused. Like, will this error out? And like, I can just run it, and it won't give me any sort of error because this is actually technically correct in Kotlin, and Kotlin actually supports this kind of approach. So now that we have actually created like our array, we'll in order to access it, we'll actually have to save it in some variable or something. So in order to save it in some variable, I'll just write val x equal to, let's say this is my array of and everything. So now x is pointing to our array which contains my name, my exact age, and my date of birth. So this is how we basically store an array, or just save a reference of it. So let's say now like we have another case where we actually want to limit the kind of data we can save inside a variable. So let's say you just want to have an array with integer data types or double data types. So the first approach will be basically that you can just automatically keep the data homogeneous. Like I can say 1, 5, 9. So all these are integer, right? Like the first approach will be this, where you can just make sure by yourself that the data is going to be of the same data type. Whereas the other thing which you can do is by changing this array of to something like int array of. So now this array will only and only store data which is of int data type. Now even like I can just execute it. Like right now I don't have any print statement, but inside this, if like let's say I just wanted to save 10.5 for some reason, like let's just wait for this to, yeah, so as you can see, it actually gave me an error saying that our value does not conform to the expected type integer, since we have told the compiler that we just wanted to make an array of the int data type. So this is how we basically create an array. So apart from int array, you can also write stuff like double array of or float. I'll just write it again here, and like float array of, or you can like seriously you can have like string array of and everything. So that is what you have the approach in Kotlin for making arrays. So now let's actually see how we can access the data from our arrays. So for that, I'm going to talk about the concept of indexing. So let's say this is my array, this is 1, 5, and 9. So every time you just save some kind of data in an array, each value which you save is actually provided with some positional arguments, positional value. That positional value is what we use to access our elements, and that positional value is actually known as the index of the value. So now as you can see, since I've stored the 1 as my first value, this will be having the first index. Now fifth is my second value, 5 is my second value, which will be having the second index. Now I have the third value, which is going to be my third index. So keep in mind that indexing always starts from 1. So for this one value, my index will be 0. Then for this 5 value, my index will be something like let's say 1, that will be 1 actually, and for my third value the index will be 2. So now, as you can see, let's actually try to access the our data out from our array. So in order to access the data, what we just do is write the variable name followed by the square brackets, and inside the square brackets I'll just go ahead and write the value which I want to access. So let's say I wanted to access this value, which is the third value. So for the third value my index is going to be 2. So I'll just go ahead and write in here 2. So like even if I try to run it, it won't actually print out anything because we are just accessing our value from our array. We are not actually passing it to the println function or anything. So I'll just go ahead and write println x2. Now this will print out 9. Yeah. So apart from that, even if I had something like, let's say, array of, and I had multiple types of data in it, like let's say my name, my age, and some other stuff. So even if I just will just do it, like let's say I wanted to print all of them, I'll just write x0 println x1. So yeah, if I would try to run it, okay, wait, array of, yeah. So if I go and write, yeah, as you can see, it printed out every data like successfully and with no issues. So this is how the concept of array creating arrays and the concept of indexing works. Not only in like the concept of indexing, not only in Kotlin but in other programming language also. Yeah. So the array of is the syntax for creating arrays in Kotlin programming language. So now let's talk about loops. Yeah. So let's say I just remove this. Let's see, we have a situation where I want to print my name about 10 times. So let's say I have println and I have my name here. So now the situation is that I need to print this my name Hardik about 10 times. So one thing which I can do is just basically go ahead and copy like and be like, okay, I can just paste it about 10 times right here. So that is actually programmatically correct, but that is not theoretically correct, not at all. So whenever you have to, like let's say, repeat a bunch of statements about a fixed number of times in Kotlin, what we can do is make use of the repeat keyword or the repeat loop. So in order to use that, what we just need to do is, like let's say this is my statement which I wanted to originally print. Now what I can do is just wrap this statement around in a repeat block. So I will just write repeat and followed by my brackets. Now inside this bracket, I'll pass on the number of times I want to repeat my statement. So let's say I wanted to repeat it 10 times. And after that, I'll just wrap it inside this. Here, this is the case. Now, when I'll try to run it, it will print out my name about 10 times. Yeah, I can just go ahead and change something like 3, and it'll just print Hardik, Hardik, Hardik. Yeah. So also do keep in mind that you can have multiple statements. Like it is not actually limited to just one statement. I can like write something like val a equal to 5, and also then just go ahead and print the value of a. It will just print it like 3 times, Hardik 5, Hardik 5, and Hardik 5. Yeah. So repeats, the repeat block is actually great when you want to repeat zero statements a fixed number of times, and you do not need to know at to what, where, like you do not need to have any context as to what a number of iteration is going on correctly. So but let's say we have another practical situation where we have an array, like let's say like we have an array writer of size 3, but let's say we have another array of which is of some random size and we don't know about as to what its size is. It can be anything. So in what like one thing which I can do is basically go ahead and write something like x0, then I'll just copy it and paste like x1. I'll just go ahead and copy and paste it like x2. Now this also is theoretical, like programmatically correct, but seriously, this is not the approach you want to have while programming. So in order to like actually do it the right way, what we do is make use of the for loop. Now in order to use a for loop, what you do is basically use a keyword for, then you write your expression inside. So for in Kotlin, what you do is first of all create a counter variable. So let's say I want to have my counter variable name as I, which is actually very common. So now what this counter variable does is basically store the number of iterations which is actually happening. So for the first iteration, it will be the first value and so on. Then I'll go ahead and let's say my value, since my array actually has three values, my index will go from something like 0, 1, and 2. So it will be from 0 to 2. So my range is going to be from 0 to 2. Now here, what I did is basically I use the dot operator to basically create a range which starts from 0 and ends at 2. And this keyword in is actually used to specify that up and until the counter has its value inside this range, we'll execute this block. And as soon as the value of I, which is our counter, goes like out of bounds, basically like let's say it becomes 3, this part will be skipped and our control will come out of it. So here, I'll just copy this statement right here and paste it. So now instead of 0, I'll just do 1 and let's see actually what it does. I'll delete this since we don't need that. And yeah, as you can see, it printed out all of our details which were present in that array. So just to give you a quick overview as to what actually happened is basically, so first of all, the value of I was actually set as 0 since that's the start of our range. So using that, this our block was called and executed. So first of all, what it did is basically execute this, which is the xi part. Now, since I was equal to 0, which means that basically println was going to print the value of a value in x, which was at the 0th index. So first of all, the value of I was equal to 0. It printed x equal to I, which is equal to x 0. Then for the second iteration, when this was executed, that means which after it printed Hardik, what happened was it actually went back and increased the value of I by 1. So then I actually became 1, and then it checked if it is in the range. Since 1 is in the range of 0 to 2, it changed the value of I from 1, and since x and our xi actually became x1, which means that we are now actually accessing the second value, that is 18.9. So after that was printed, it went back and increased the value of I by 1, which became 2. And thus xi became x2, which actually printed our third value, which is 2002. So after that is printed, it actually increases the value of I and it becomes 3. But since I is no longer in range, which is 0 to 2, it actually skips out our execution and the control moves out of it. So that is the basics on as to how the for loop works inside Kotlin. And so just to remind you again that repeat is actually you can use repeat when you do not need to know as to what are iteration, like which number of iteration is currently going on. Like if you just want to repeat your statements like let's say 10 times or 20 times, you can just use the keyword repeat and provide it with the number of times you want your code block to be repeated. So now that since that's done, let's just talk about functions now. Now all this while I've been writing my code inside this fun main part. Like inside this block, this writer, all this code was actually written it inside this fun main block. Now, what this fun main actually is that it is a function which has the name main. Now, fun main actually means that as I said, the function which is titled main, but this actually has a significance in programming. So every time you write a program, you do need to have some sort of start point or start control point from where the execution will start off. So inside Kotlin, it is defined by the fun main. So anytime, so this is the function which is called in order to start the execution of your program. So let's create a very own function now. So let's say I want to have a function which will take two values. Maybe both should be int, like not maybe let's say just both are going to be int, which is integer. And what I want to do is basically print the sum of them. So I'll write print the sum of it. Yeah. So in order to define the function in Kotlin, what we do is make use of the fun keyword. So, I mean, fun directly implies it is the short form of the word function. So I'll just go ahead and write fun, then name, and then give my function name. Like, let's say I just want to write add two numbers. And after that, I'll create a pair of brackets. Now, inside these brackets, I'll define my arguments. Now, arguments are the you can talk about them as the values which your function needs to work. So since I'm going to add two numbers, I'll be needing two values. Now let's say I want to save my first value in a variable a and the second value in a variable b. So what I'll do is go ahead and write a, which is my variable name, and set it as int. Like tell the compiler that my first value is going to be an integer. Then I'll put a comma and define the second value, which is going to be saved in b, and it is going to be of type int. So that is basically basic like a definition of our function. Now after that, I'll just create a code block, and inside this I'll write my statements which I need to perform using the value a and b. So I'll just write it like, since I we wanted to print the sum of it, I'll just go ahead and write a plus b. So now let me just delete this stuff out of here. So now I can just call my function add to numbers actually. Yeah, add two numbers. Like let's say I wanted to print the sum of 60 and 50. Yeah, I can just write add two numbers 60 comma 50, and when I execute it, it will print the sum, which is 110. So this these values which I'm passing, I can actually also be changed, or they can actually be referenced from some variables. Like let's say I have my value inside some x variable which I want to use. Like let's say x is 100 and my first value is going to be x, so I can just run it, and it will give us 150. So what happened here was basically when I called my add to number function, first of all, it read what the value of x is. Now, since the value of x was 100, my function add to numbers was called with the values 100 and 50. So when the control reached here, basically A was having the value 100 and B was having the value 50. And after that, what we did is basically print out the sum of it. Now let's say what if I just change it to something like 50.5. Let's see what happens. So now when I'll try to run it, see, it gives out an error saying that the floating point literal does not conform to the expected type int. Since we already defined it inside this add to numbers function, we want both the values to be int, that is also the second value be as int. So whenever we try to pass something which is not an integer, it will give us an error that saying that the method actually expects to use a value which is of type int. So that was a basic overview of Kotlin, and we'll actually go ahead and take a break of like 2 minutes before starting off with the overview of Android Studio and everything. So do anyone have? Let me see the chat if there are any questions. Typecasting. Can you please show the last code? Yes. Wait. So which code exactly? This one for the function? I'll just go ahead and paste it here. Int, is this like oops type reference? So Kotlin is actually an object-oriented programming language, but it does not actually like strictly follow all the oops paradigms in itself. So actually, arrays will always have a type. It will just use the type any. Yes, that is something which happens internally. So any in Kotlin is actually a keyword which defines as like a super abstract or generalized object. Like it does not conform to any sort of particular object or properties. Can we pass a float argument 53.5 to function if we don't define the data type while defining function? You actually need to define the data type. Like let's say I just deleted it. It actually will like not work. See, as you can see, if we actually need to specify as to what data type we need to have for our variable and the value which are going to accept in order to function. Yeah, if we don't define the data, yeah. So I guess that covered it. So now let's start off with. I'll go to start now. Let's actually start off with the overview of Android Studio. So this is so whenever you will open Android Studio, this is probably going to be the first window which you will see. Now, right here, you can see we have a bunch of options like create new project, open an existing project, get from object control, and we have set like configure and everything. So I'll quickly give you a rundown before like let's start. Let's say you already have a project which you downloaded off from somewhere, maybe some tutorial website or something. So this open an existing project is to be used then. Like you already have a folder in your drive and you want to open it in Android Studio. Then this get from version control is used when, let's say, you have your project on a GitHub repository or like GitLab repository or anywhere. So all you need to do is basically paste the link of that repository, and what Android Studio will do is basically download it and open it in the Android Studio editor itself. So yeah, now let's talk about this part, which is create new project. So now as soon as you click it, we'll be like told to just, this is actually used to create a new project in Android Studio. So now it will ask us to choose a project template. So now we have a bunch of project templates inside Android Studio. So like let's say you do not want to add a tabbed activity for yourself. You can just go ahead and select the tabbed activity template here, and the project which it will create will be already be having the tabbed activity part set up for you. Same is with like a navigation or activity and all these kinds of template. But for now, what we'll do is just go ahead and choose the empty activity template, and I'll click on next. And right here, it will now ask us for the application name, package name, and some other stuff. So first of all, the name of the application. So this is what you will be saying once you install your application, like in your app drawer on or your home screen. This is what will be written when you will install your app's APK. Okay. So now I can have it like anything. Like let's say I can have study jam. Yeah. So let's talk about the package name now. Now, package name is actually super important because the package name is actually what the Android platform itself uses to differentiate between between two APKs. So you can actually have two APKs which have different package names but same names. Like you can install them, and on your home screen you will be seeing two apps which quite possibly be having the same name, but internally their package name is different. So the Android just thinks of them as two individual apps. But for a situation like, let's say you already have another app installed which is of the same package name on which you are working, then you will be getting an error saying that like the app is already installed, or like since the platform actually cannot differentiate between those two apps. So this needs to be super like identifiable and super unique for you and for your platform itself. So right now I've just set it to like something like dsc.studyjam.studyjams. Now, after that, you'll have the save location, which will be dependent on as to where you want to save your project. And under language, what we need to do is choose Kotlin, since we are actually doing our tracks using the Kotlin programming language. Now, let's actually talk about minimum edges, since this is actually a quite important part while creating an app. So if you'll actually like, let me show it again. Like as soon as you click on this part, help me choose. Now this gives a super basic infographic as to what percentage of devices in the Android basically on earth are actually using what Android platform. So like when it says Marshmallow is having an 84.9%, so that means that most like about 84.9% of the Android devices which are existing in this world are running at least Marshmallow. Like they might be having something above which is updated, like maybe Pi or Odoo, but they at least be supporting the Marshmallow firmware. So uh, regarding like, wait, I'll just open it again. So let's say, so what does this actually mean for you as a developer? Now let's say you are actually working on some sort of app which is super basic. Like all you need to do is basically fetch information from the internet and just display it in your Android app. Since that's like super basic and is not really exactly dependent on some sort of API which platform has. You can make your app support to, and basically a minimum set the minimum required to something like Lollipop or even Jelly Bean, KitKat, if that works out. But let's say you have a situation where you are working on an Android app which uses a new API, which let's say which came in with Pi. Like let's say, for example, that when notched phones became a thing, it was Android Pie which first officially first supported those notched phones and introduced a bunch of APIs for it. So let's say if you are using one of those APIs, you cannot actually target your app to have a minimum SDK to Oreo in order to use it. You can target it, but you need to have set some other kind of like what do you say? Like use some different form of code to run your app on Oreo and Nougat and everything else. So that was like a super basic overview for the minimum SDK. Since right now our app is just going to be a basic Hello World project, I can have my minimum SDK as Marshmallow, and I'll just go ahead and tap on finish. Now we wait for it to actually generate everything. So at the bottom, as you can see, it will be saying it says scanning file to index. It will soon say something. Okay, it's already indexing now. Since I've actually already opened my Android Studio before and have things set it up before in order to like present to you guys, my build is actually like decently quick enough. But if you will be opening Android Studio like for the first time, there will be a different bunch of libraries and binaries which the Android Studio will be downloading in the background, so in order to set it up for first time use. So just keep in mind that it might take a bit longer depending on your internet connection. So we'll just wait for this to quickly load up. And yeah, so now that is done. So this first window which you will see, the like this whole big window is actually the editor window. This is where you write your code for your application and like you do the major part of it. Now if we switch over to this file, which is the activity underscore main.xml, this is actually the Android Studio layout editor. So from here, what you do is basically create new layouts for your Android app and basically like add a bunch of views and create whatever design you want for your Android app. So apart from this, on the left side, right here, this is the file section where you can see all your project files which you have in your Android Studio project itself. So I can just click on this res folder, and under layout, as I can see, is my activity underscore main.xml and everything. And right here, I have my main activity.kt and everything. So this, but keep in mind that this in reality is not the actual representation of how files are laid out in your project directory. So in order to see the real project structure, what you need to do is basically click on this Android tab and choose project. So once that's done, inside your folder name, when you click, this actually gives a more realistic representation of how the files are actually layered out inside your project folder. So if I go click on app, then src, then on main, this is actually where my files are residing, and this is the actual project structure of my folder. So when this is like a super basic overview of this and everything. So one thing which I would like to show you, like since as you can see, my font is pretty small now, like, and I would like to change it. So what you can do is basically go to File and tap on Settings. So under Settings, you have like a host of different settings for your Android Studio setup. I will just go ahead and tap on Editor and Font. So now I can just change my whatever font I want to use and the size which I want to, like. Let's say I wanted to increase the size and I made it, I think, a bit bigger. Yeah, it, like, let's say I wanted to have it 20. So yeah, now it is 20 now. So like these are something, these that was a super basic setting which I wanted to talk about, because I've actually seen people not change the font and the font size, and they all were, or they were like pretty uncomfortable while they were actually trying to code inside Android Studio. So that was a super basic point. Now this, so since we actually chose the empty template for our Android activity, all we have is basically this activity underscore main.xml, which is the layout file for our app. And this is the code file which is going to have for our Android app, which is going to the background code, which will like define how things work and function inside our app. So let's actually see how we can actually run this Android app on our system itself. So I actually have a small presentation right here with screenshots. Now, so in order to actually install and test Android apps on your device, there is a thing which you'll need to enable, which is actually called USB debugging. Now, in order to enable USB debugging, the first thing you need to do is enable developer options in your device. Now, enabling developer options is a bit tricky in some Android devices because like the things are not actually really laid out pretty clearly. So you might need to check with your manufacturer in order to enable those settings. So this right here, I've taken a screenshot from my OnePlus phone. So I'll just go ahead and show you. So what you need to do is basically like if you have an Android in something like this, which has a layout like this, what you need to do is go to the about phone section, and then inside this what you need to do is find a section or like a text called build number. So when you will tap on the build number about 7 times, you will receive a message which would probably saying congrats, you are a developer now, or if you just tap it again, it would be saying no need to since you are already a developer. So that is something which I'll again say you need to check in with your manufacturer. Like I've seen some Xiaomi phones and Realme phones like have a super weird and different layout for their settings app. So that is something which you'll need to check online. Now, after that is done, what you need to do is find developer options. Now, you can also like just go to the top and search for it directly, but it is usually inside this system section. So inside the system section, you have this developer options part. Now, as soon as you tap it, the all the different kinds of developer options which are present in your device will show up here. So first of all, you'll have to go ahead and enable the master toggle for this whole section. Like if you just turn it off, you won't be able to modify any of these settings and everything. So you'll have to first turn this on. And after that is done, you'll have to scroll a bit and find the section which is titled as USB debugging and turn this switch on. Now, once that is done, what you need to do is basically connect your phone to your PC using your USB cable. And when as soon as you will do it, if everything has been done properly, you will probably be seeing a prompt something like this, which would be saying allow USB debugging, and it will have the fingerprint of your computer right here. And right here, make sure to check mark this box which is says always allow from this computer, and click on allow. So now after that is done, your device is actually set up to like set up correctly in order to test and develop Android apps on itself. Now, another thing, like let's say you do not actually have an Android phone in hand, but you want to do like Android app development. You can make use of something which is actually known as the Android emulator, but I won't be talking about that right now because I don't think that it is super important for me to talk about that right now. And it actually is like a resource hog. I mean, if even if I wanted to talk about it like seriously, my system would just go crashing and I won't be able to present anything. It just takes RAM like crazy. Yeah. So once that's done, let me just go ahead and actually connect my device right now. So I'll just use my cable. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah. Now I'll just connected my device. Yeah, should read. And yeah, as soon as I connect it, as you can see on the top right, it actually says now OnePlus AC2001, which is the model of my device. I want to show my screen. So I think, yeah, now, so this is the screen of my device. Okay, so this is like mirroring in real time. So now what I'll do is click on this play button, which is actually the run button. So now as soon as I'll click on it, it will actually start a process which is called the Gradle build. Now what Gradle is actually is that Gradle is a build system which Android Studio uses in order to build and compile and like run your Android application from source. So now the first thing which Gradle actually does is it just goes through each and every file in your project and checks if there is any error and Okay, so now that is loaded. Okay, so now as you can see, it just loaded up and it says hello world, just what we wanted. So this was a basic layout and it is now showing up as hello world. Yeah.
So, is there any questions which you guys want to ask? How to enable dark mode? Okay, so that again depends on your manufacturer. I mean, yeah. So, do we have any questions? So before I hand it over to Dhruv Bhaiya in order to close this session, I'll once again go ahead and tell you all about the tracks. So the tracks are actually completely going to be self-paced. So which means that you do not need to wait for more Android jams to take place in order to complete the tracks. You need to do this all by yourself. Definitely we are here to help you out, but again, since you don't wait for us to take more jams and teach stuff and everything in order to complete this. Yeah, that is the end of it. Over to you, Dhruv Bhaiya.
For now, let's just do one thing. All of you go to the site which Hardik has showed and start the beginner program. Okay. And for those of you who are well acquainted with the the beginner track, you can do the other track as well directly. But remember, you need to do both for like getting the certification.